Hello, welcome everyone. I think everyone that comes here is in search, like I am, of truth and understanding, in pursuit of both and more besides. Got another fantastic guest in the waiting room, ready for an interview. He was once upon a time at the heart of the world's largest investment corporation, let's say, handling a multi-billion pound dollar portfolio. So it should be an all-round fascinating conversation because in the last few years he has involved himself in so much more. Before we get started, let me please invite you to check out my patreon.com site, upon which everything depends, quite frankly. Go there, sign up, part with a little bit of cash, the equivalent of the price of a cup of coffee every month. In return, you get early access to all the new content, interviews included, and exclusive access to a question and answer session, amongst other things, which is basically a therapy session for me, but you're welcome to join. Altogether, it's a great site. Come along, make it even better by being there with me. Okay, let's get ready to chat. Today's guest is Ed Dowd, a founding partner of investment firm Phinance Technologies. But for most of you on here, I'm sure he's familiar and known for other things. He's an author. For many years, Ed worked on Wall Street, in the belly of the beast, you might say. Most notably, Ed was for a decade the manager of a multi-billion-dollar portfolio for BlackRock. Oh, the things Ed must have seen. But for me, for several years now, more than anything else, Ed has been a man brave enough and well-informed enough, seriously and effectively, to confront the reality of so much of what we as a species have been put through since, well, at least 2020. A very warm welcome to you, Ed Dowd.
Thanks for having me on, Neil. I appreciate you, and thanks for inviting me on today.
No, it's a real pleasure. I've been listening to you for such a long time now. I've paid so much attention to what you've had to say. Where to begin? So many questions to ask. Given the context, the time in which we're living right at the moment, President-elect Donald J. Trump and Robert Kennedy Jr., his choice to oversee, let's say, the US health agencies, they intend to make America healthy again. Now, with all that you've covered in relation to the COVID, I would call it the fake pandemic, can they achieve that, and will they achieve that?
I'm very hopeful and optimistic. The problem we have is they need to get confirmed, and I'm hopeful they can. Then once they get in there, they're facing a bureaucracy of employees that have been there for decades. And one of the things people need to understand about the U.S. government, politicians are looked at as the summer help. They come and go, but the bureaucracy remains. The administrative state, the deep state, whatever you want to call it. And these people, these institutions have been corrupted. And there's just a revolving door between government and industry. And that's why we are in the state we're in now. There's been a complete corruption of our health institutions. And Bobby and others in their respective agencies need to remove what I call the permanent bureaucrats. There's people called senior executive service members that sit above the highest paid level, which is G15 in the government, and these people can't be fired. So there needs to be a lot of work done. I use the analogy, they're like blood-filled ticks burrowed in. And this is going to be a monumental task, and it's going to take time. But I'm very optimistic and hopeful. President Trump won with a landslide. He won the electoral vote and the popular vote, so he has a mandate. The question is, he's got the enemies are the mainstream media, corporate America, and the administrative state that all have profited from this arrangement for the last 50 years.
Do you subscribe at all to the Uni-Party Hypothesis? Which would have it that whoever is in the White House, or indeed whoever's in Downing Street in London, the administration that affects my life, that it doesn't matter because they're all working towards the same end, if at different speeds and using different techniques? Or do you think and believe that within the proposed Trump administration. There is that genuine cleaning of the Augean stables determination to fundamentally alter the status quo.
I think there's hope. I mean, in Trump's first administration, he made some missteps in personnel, and he didn't understand that he needed people loyal to him to carry out his agenda, because a lot of the people that got into his administration had dual agendas for themselves and the system. And now, if you look at the people he's proposing for his cabinet, they're all loyalists, they're all serious, their rhetoric suggests that they're serious about this. So I'm very hopeful, but I subscribe to the fact there is a Uni-Party, and also probably in the UK, where there's a system, and the system is so big and so grand that someone who's ideological, either in the UK or the US, who gets voted in, quickly gets swallowed by the system. And there's a number of ways to do that. There's blackmail, there's campaign contributions, jobs promised, lobbying jobs promised afterwards. So people slowly but surely have the ideological spark. Most can't withstand the system's temptations and they fall to it. But there are some that stay true to what they got voted in on. There aren't many. But the system kind of corrupts you once you get in there. And there is a Uni-Party. I mean, it's obvious. In the U.S., the Republicans have played the loyal opposition to the state. They pretend to, care about the people, and they go on Fox News and they say some things, or they tweet some things out, but they never do anything. So, I subscribe to your view that there is a Uni-Party that keeps the system rolling along.
With that in mind, how much weight do you think Bobby Kennedy carries? And it's hard. It's difficult. I view it from this side of the Atlantic, separated by thousands of miles and much else besides. And clearly, he's been so outspoken for so many years, long before it was, fashionable is probably not the right word, but he's been so outspoken about vaccines. The whole dose given to American infants. He's spoken about the link to autism and other neurological conditions. Does he wield real gravitas and authority, as you would see it in the US? He
does. If anybody ever listens to a long form podcast with Bobby Kennedy, you can see that his knowledge is deep. This is a man that he was an environmental lawyer who got and he talks jokingly about how he got roped into the vaccine issue, but once he dug into it, he realized what has gone on. And what's gone on is not serious science and testing. And so these vaccines that have been rolled out haven't been tested seriously. So he wants to go back, test, use real science, real tests, real double-blinded studies, and determine what the actual severe adverse events are from these vaccines. He's not saying, I'm against vaccines. He's saying, if we're going to have them, let's test them like we should have. And, the law in the U.S. that was passed in, I believe, 86 or 87 under Ronald Reagan gave immunity to the vaccine makers, because they cried and said, oh, we can't produce these vaccines unless we get immunity. And what that's done is, taken the schedule of vaccines you get as an infant from when I was a child, 6 to 70. Because, an incentive like that, no liability, let's just roll them out and let's make money.
I have watched in, bewildered disbelief. I find Bobby Kennedy Jr. extremely credible. His heart in that area in relation to that subject seems to be 100% in the right place. And when he talks about, it's anecdotal, it's his observation, it's his experience that when he was a kid, growing up, there was, effectively, de facto, there was no autism. You just didn't see it. And I think the figures were 1 in 10,000, or low enough that to be non-existent. And now he quotes figures as low as 1 in 30, 1 in 22 American school kids diagnosed with autism. I find that America, of all places, would be the country where such a statistic has been made manifest. Whatever the cause, it's surely staggering.
It's unbelievable. And, you have to ask some questions. People like to say correlation is not causation. Well, let's face it. After a period of time, you have to look at what happened with the vaccine schedule. The problem has been it's been a sacred cow. You're not allowed to talk about it. You're censored and maligned. So there seems to, and I'm one of these people. I worked on Wall Street. When you're not allowed to talk about something, that's really something you should talk about. And so the fact that this has been an issue that's been so maligned says to me there's a lot of there. So my guess is that, and again, I didn't do a lot of work on other vaccines. We did the work on the COVID mRNA vaccine, which we've proven is deadly. But the other vaccines, there's enough there that needs to be investigated. And, I'm just watching the increase in autism since that bill was passed in 86, 87. We should start there. And the reason that we don't is profits and add dollars to the media companies who are basically bribed not to air any stories about that. The U.S. has, as you know, we're one of the only countries that allows pharmaceutical industry to advertise on TV. And that's really not how you sell pharmaceuticals, but they do it to it's basically silence payments for the media.
I stated at the front a very brief idea of your background, Wall Street and the rest of it, your portfolio manager. From what direction and really what inspiration connected you to the subject of all of this? I only know you because of what you began to say in relation to the medical interventions for COVID. What connected you to that train?
Well, so, I experienced in my career mild anxiety and depression in 2011-12. And I made the mistake of seeking help from psychiatrists that put me on SSRIs. And those almost killed me. They made me worse. And I eventually found out from a friend who was a psychiatrist that, and this has been proven in the last year or two, he told me back in 2011-12 that there's no such thing as a chemical imbalance in the brain, and that it's never been proven, and that these drugs were being prescribed to address that. It was a marketing ploy. So he then took me, we went on a program, he took me off all the drugs, and I resolved my depression and anxiety through, what I call the three-legged stool: spirituality, exercise, and diet, and present moment thinking. And I got rid of it. This is I cured my own depression by addressing the root cause. So I restored my health. Then in 2021, all of a sudden there were mandates, and I was very suspicious of the jab from the get-go because I had knowledge from Wall Street. I knew a couple things. One, that mRNA technology had never been tested on humans, and that all the rats died in the animal studies. That was alarming to me. And then I also knew that Moderna, one of the companies chosen, had never actually produced a product ever. So that was alarming. I knew that the CEO was a bit of a scumbag, so that alarmed me. I also knew from my days on Wall Street that it took 10 years of safety data before they would roll out a normal vaccine. So I was it was a gene-based therapy, and I didn't like the idea of altering my genes. So in 2020, I knew this was coming. I was like, well, I'm not taking it. Then in 21, the mandates hit, and then I saw the propaganda, the hysteria, and I said to myself, I am not going to compromise my health, and I suspect these vaccines will cause damage. It was a thesis at the time. And anecdotally, in early 21, I was seeing the evidence. So in 2020 on Maui, I didn't know anybody who got COVID, believe it or not. 2020, I didn't know one person who got COVID.
I believe it. I still don't know anybody. I certainly don't know anyone who died of COVID. And I don't know anyone who knows anyone who died of COVID.
Yeah, in 2020 on Maui, no one I knew got COVID, and no one I knew died of COVID. Then in 2021, COVID springs up, and then all of a sudden the vaccines rolled out, and I hear of the uncle dying on the mainland suddenly. Some of my friends who took the vax had adverse reactions. Some of them actually got COVID after taking the vax. So I was super suspicious, and that's when I got activated. And then for the first time in my life, I decided to join protests. I was standing side by side with hippies, vegans. We were all, people who cared about their health and their bodily sovereignty. So I found myself with people that I would never normally hang out with. And that's when I started to realize this was bigger than just our self-identified little boxes we all think we were in. It was about team humanity. And so I, through the grace of God, was hooked up with Dr. Malone when he came to Maui. And I told him that I would, I had suspicion the vaccines were causing untold harms. And because I'm an investor, you start with anecdotes and a thesis, and then you gather evidence to confirm your thesis over time, like I would with a stock pick. I had a thesis. In BlackRock days, I would buy the stock, a little bit of it, then do some work, and then keep doing work. And the more work I did, the more confirmation I'd get, the bigger the position would become. So I told them I'd monitor insurance companies and funeral homes. I thought if the vaccine was a problem, and I knew that the state was not going to say it was a problem because they were pushing it so hard, I said this will show up there. And sure enough, it showed up in insurance companies in late 21, early 22. Funeral home stocks took off. They saw, business was booming. And then, so as I got more confirmation, I eventually hooked up with a couple gentlemen from Portugal, Carlos Alegre and Yuri Nunes, and they're both PhD physicists. They reached out to me and they said, look, Ed, we want to help. And they were from Phinance as well. They came from hedge fund land. And we used their skill sets, and we started to do deep research on just mega databases showing that excess deaths were taking off, disabilities were taking off, and then eventually we started to come up with a category called injury, which manifested in lost work time, chronic sickness, and we started to measure these things. And so, over the last 2.5 years, we've assembled a body of evidence and many research papers showing not only excess deaths, but different causes of death taking off: cancers, neurological disorders, skin issues, musculoskeletal issues, liver issues, heart attacks, and they all inflected around 2021. In your country, we investigated a database known as the Personal Independence Payment System, PIPS, the PIPS system, which is a beautiful database because it shows all the different causes that people apply for disability. They all took off in 2021, and the new claims went from up 4% in 2020 or 6% to, by 2022, 76% increase in all new claims, and a whole host of different disorders, from psychological, mental, cardiovascular, blood, you name it, it just took off.
It was precisely because I began just obsessively listening to podcasts and people talking in the alternative media. And so many, obviously, you name-checked Bob Malone and Peter McCullough and all of the early kind of responders to the situation. But then you'd expect to hear from physicians and research scientists and so on and so on. But it was precisely because you were coming out of a financial, and if I can say, a kind of a number crunching, financial data crunching background, that I thought, that's truly alarming. That testimony there, you didn't have a medical first responder axe to grind. I was especially alarmed because you were coming in and looking at these gross data sets and coming up with the numbers that you did. And that said, after all the numbers and all the crunching, can you summarize, can you put into a few sentences what you think has happened here, and exactly how much of and I would use the word catastrophe, has been dumped on the species Homo sapiens here?
Yeah, absolutely. We started to measure. We called it the pandemic scorecard in the U.S. So I'll go over the U.S. numbers, and then we made some simple back of the envelope calculations. We can take it up to a global number. But in the U.S., since 2021 and the vaccine rollout, 1.2 million Americans died excessively. That's an alarming number. If the vaccines had worked, obviously that number would have gone below zero. We'd have negative excess deaths. We did not. So that's 1.2 million souls that disappeared because of this. Then we also looked at disabilities. In the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the U.S., disabilities had been running around 30 million in the U.S. for the prior 4 years to 2021. And then in February of 21, they took off. And there was, look, we're math guys. We look at the rate of change. And the rate of change and the growth, we went from 30 million to 34 million by June of 2023. But in the first year, it was explosive, and the rate of change was a 4 standard deviation event, meaning it had gone off the rails, and we look at that, we call that a trend change. So a trend of disability inflected and took off. And what was alarming about the increase in disability was that of those 4 million, about 2 million were employed. Isn't that interesting? And when you think about the employed of a country, they tend to be, working age, younger. They tend to be the most healthy amongst us because they're able to get up in the morning and get to work, okay? So all of a sudden we have 2 million newly disabled employed people. How does that happen? Well, interestingly enough, if you mandate a vaccine in the U.S., which it was, you want to keep your job, you need to get a jab. So that was, for us, a smoking gun. You just don't all of a sudden have a bunch of employed people getting disabled from COVID. And so that's about 4 million. And then we noticed that in the BLS data that there was chronic absences and work time lost. And that's a category we called injured, and that's how it manifested. And then we looked at the Pfizer clinical trial papers, and we noticed that in the vaccine arm, severe adverse events were 18% greater than in the placebo arm. So if you take that number, and mind you, the placebo was not a saline, it was another vaccine. So there were severe adverse events in that arm, but we just took the difference between the two. So in the Pfizer clinical trials, because of that safety signal, they should have ended the study and said this isn't going to work, but they just rolled it out. So when we estimate the number of injured, those who are either sick or feeling less than optimal, in the U.S. we come up with a number of about 33 million. Okay, so when you take those 4 buckets, so it's a funnel: injured, disabled, dead, and those you can move from one bucket. It's a funnel. You can move from one bucket to the next. So when we roll that up globally, we made some simple assumptions that there were about 5 billion people who got the doses, not all Pfizer and Moderna, but so we came up with ranges. When we estimate that, we came up with a number of 8 to 15 million globally who died from the vaccines. There's been other studies that corroborate this. Dennis Rancourt did a study that came up with 17 million. So our range, the top end of our range is right on his number. He did a different methodology, so that's fine. We don't all have to, do the same methodology, but, from the ballpark, we're in the ballpark. Then disabilities, we came up with a number of 40 to 60 million globally, and then injured 500 to 900 million. So we have a large, about, let's call it 1 billion people who are at risk of serious health issues going forward.
That analogy, that image of a funnel, I haven't heard that previously, and that's very alarming. Because you don't, obviously, a person like me, you tend to be particularly focused on death for obvious reasons. But that idea that it's not a static, that you're not necessarily mildly incapacitated at the moment, and that's the end of it. That idea of being in a funnel. And then you play that out, and it's, as you say, suggestive of people can still progress from one bucket to the next. So it's still happening. It's still a live issue.
Yeah, let me also say something. So in the early days, the excess deaths peaked in 21, 22. The good news is word started spreading that the vaccine didn't work. So a huge part of the population stopped taking it because it didn't work. Another part of the population heard people like you and me warn about it. So booster uptake is abysmally low. So excess deaths right directly from the vaccine have dropped. But excess deaths right now are currently running between 7 and 13% in the US. That's the run rate, and it doesn't seem to be coming down. That's kind of the issue, the funnel. So we're going to be stuck with an excess death level for years to come. And I'm not the only one saying that. Swiss Re, a big insurance reinsurer, came out with a study that said we're going to have excess deaths for another 10 years. Now, they blamed COVID, and they said to go get the vaccine. But our numbers match. There's an excess death problem that's not going away, and that has serious implications going forward. There's also huge economic implications. We try to put numbers on this. We figured as of 2023, we took the three buckets. It costs the economy $235 billion, lost wages and things like this. And, we're going to have a chronically sick part of the population that needs, to know what happened, which is not widely known yet. So they can treat the root cause, not what people are, the doctor, you present with cancer, great, but why did you get the cancer? Maybe if you take care of the root cause, which is the spike protein, you have a better shot. But we need to get this on a global level messaging. I hope the new administration does this and recalls the mRNA vaccine, and that will open the floodgates of liability. But we need to heal the globe. There are people walking around not feeling well, wondering why. And this is going to have long-term economic impacts as you move down the funnel. And then there's the issue we have to take care of these disabled people. A lot of them were working age, so and a lot of them were, our military all had to take the vaccine. So there's just this hidden health issue that isn't going away anytime soon. And that's what's alarming to us. The good news is, we kind of won. There was a plan to have vaccine passports, digital IDs, and take these things every 6 months. That's over. But there's still a part of the population that believes that this is a good thing, and they get their boosters every 6 months. And it's basically like Russian roulette.
To pull out a little bit from that profoundly alarming, profoundly upsetting picture that you paint, and you say that people don't know, people feeling unwell but not asking why, or not in the meaningful way that's required. What does it say about the species or society at large? Is it willful blindness? Is it just genuine, even after 3 years, the case that people haven't come across this information? Or is it's almost like Stockholm syndrome? It's almost as if people know that something was done to them and have just in some way internalized it, rather than point blame where blame ought to be pointed.
There's a lot of cognitive dissonance, but there's also, unfortunately, the system has done a good job of propagandizing and mind controlling people. There's definitely military psyops. We heard about them. They bragged about them. Specifically in some of the UK newspapers, the military bragged about how they had a propaganda campaign to scare people into taking the thing. So we know that this is one of the largest psyops ever employed on a global scale. And if you go back to the dark days, and I'm sure you noticed this as well, every nation had the same messaging. When has every nation ever agreed on anything? I've never seen nations agree. They all were in lockstep with this messaging, which was super alarming to me. And unfortunately, we have a large body of our, different country populations that are just propagandized. They've given up their critical thinking skills. They have no ability to think for themselves, and they want to be told what to do. And that, for me, that's the biggest threat we have. It's not so much the lead. There's not enough leaders and enforcers. It's the rest of the people that buy into it. Those are our biggest threat, the unwitting, the fools, the people who don't know. And it's our job to kind of educate them, but some of these people are never going to figure it out.
you talk. I absolutely noticed that the lockstep of the messaging. Build back better, narrow window of opportunity. Flatten the curve, and so on and so on, which feels like intelligent design. And if it was intelligent design, was it intelligently designed at a central point? Was this, if it wasn't, if it's not natural or unprecedented for so many nations to agree, was something else, as we've all feared and conspired about and hypothesized about, is it centrally controlled?
So, early days, I had a thesis that over time seems to be proving out. Those of us on Wall Street, ever since the great financial crisis, have been wondering what they're going to do about the debt problem. And the debt in 2008 and 9, they solved a debt problem with more debt. So there was kind of a handoff from the private sector, that the banks that blew up the system, to the governments and the central banks. And the central banks and the governments together created unprecedented government spending to kind of fill the hole that had been left behind by the financial system. That created, over the last 14 years, what we all know to come to be what's coming as the global sovereign debt crisis. And in 2019, the plumbing was coming undone. There were things going on that most people don't know about in the short-term end of the market. There were lots of issues. And we felt that the global economy was going to roll over. And then magically, COVID happened in 2020. Also, you need to know that in 2020, China's demographics hit a wall in 2020 and are going the wrong way. So 2020 seemed to be, for me, suspicious, because we thought that they'd take care of the global debt problem with war. They could still do that, because wars always cover up debt issues, and a lot of nations go to war over debt. So I had a sneaky suspicion that there was, like you said, there was a central control plan. And what tipped me off was April 5th of 2020, a Federal Reserve President, James Bullard, gets on Face the Nation. And they ask him how we're going to open up the economy with everyone so scared and, people dying. He said, "Oh, good news. We have new surveillance technologies, and we could test every day and issue immunity badges." This is pre-vaccine. So I said to myself, why is the Federal Reserve President weighing in on this? So I have a sneaky suspicion that, and I can't prove it, but again, I'll tell you a data point I learned yesterday that seems to confirm it, that this was designed to collapse the system, institute control systems. The vaccine passport would be a way to reintroduce a CBDC, a digital ID, and get people in fear looking this way while they reset the system. That failed for the time being, thankfully. And the system is going to reset at some point. We still have the problems. They haven't gone away. And, this is why we see wars and war talk going on.
You see, to me, you mentioned there where your ongoing speculation about what COVID-19 was and where it came from. And to me, whether it was cooked up, whether it was anything at all, whether there was actually a new disease, or whether it happened because, something got together with something else in a wet market, whatever, it doesn't matter to me. It's what was done, in inverted commas, to respond to it.
Correct.
And it's exactly what so where it came from, whatever, interesting conversation. It's what they did with it. It's what they used it for. And it must all, I think about that all the time, that I watch other podcasts and people talk about, there's a ticker tape behind Natalie and Clayton Morris's heads in Redacted, counting up the American debt, 36 trillion, and the trillions in derivatives hanging over everybody's head as well. And that is the problem. That is the immovable object to which presumably they're bringing to bear the unstoppable force to try and get it out of their way. Everything that's happening in relation to COVID, in relation to the climate crisis, in relation to war in Ukraine, in relation to what's happening in the Middle East, they still and always have to find some way to deal with the financial elephant in the room. Yeah. So I'd really like to hear you speculate more about that, because, after all, that is the world you swim in.
That is exactly it. And that I put out many statements on X and Gettr saying what you have to understand is everything you're seeing going on in the world comes back to the fact that the central bankers and the politicians have created this monster. They can't take the blame. So there has to be something else to point to for its collapse. It's a magic trick. It's alchemy. This is a problem, but I don't want to take the blame. Let's blame COVID. Let's blame war with Russia. Let's blame Middle East. Let's blame something. And every other nation has incentive to blame something else other than what they've created themselves. They can't take responsibility for this. It is for me, it is the genesis of what we're seeing. This instability in the world is because the debt can no longer be serviced and they're pretending it can, and they're trying to manage the implosion of this, and they need distractions. I jokingly say for the system to keep going, it needs constant credit creation, because this is a little known fact, but it's a debt-based fiat system. So when you print, you create debt, and then the governments have to spend that, and that the debt goes on the government's balance sheet. It needs constant credit creation for it not to implode on itself. And we're at the point now where we need ever increasing amounts of credit creation at faster rates. The time in which you could have a credit creation event that would carry the economy for years is getting shorter and shorter and shorter, because the marginal revenue of debt issued is getting lower and lower and lower. So it's a math problem. And so I jokingly say, for the system to keep going, it needs such large credit spending events. I wouldn't be surprised if the aliens come and there's a unified front across the globe to set up national or global defense. Can you imagine the spending that would go on there? That's a joke, but maybe it comes to fruition. And we see in the news these days, Congress is holding hearings on UFOs and these mysterious things appearing over our nuclear arsenal. So I jokingly say that, but there has to be an event so big to justify the continuation of the system, or they let it implode, and they need a reason to blame it. So to your audience, anything you see going on is manufactured, in my opinion, to protect the central bankers and the politicians from their own folly.
Within that, and let's come back to how big a distraction or how big an event there has to be. The phenomenal rise of cryptocurrencies. What most people regard as Bitcoin, but obviously there are many forms. How much should we be paying attention to how much is happening in relation to, say, Bitcoin? The extent to which the US government's getting involved in it, the extent to which the price of it is ballooning again. Is that just a small thing, or is there real basal level significance to what's happening in that market?
Well, Bitcoin was viewed as a way to protect your wealth from the government. The fact that governments are getting involved in it, once the government gets involved in something, even if it's our guys, it worries me. There's been speculation that Bitcoin is going to be used to introduce a central bank digital currency, which then leads to forms of control and direct control of our behaviors. So we just have to be very wary. The Bitcoin community is about freedom and leaving me alone, and it's kind of a hedge against government debt, right? If the governments embrace it, we have to start asking questions why.
What happens, hypothetically, if I've said, you're saying, you've said jokingly that they'll say the aliens have landed. I've said kind of jokingly, but not really. What happens if they just go for a jubilee? The kind of Old Testament writing off of debt that happened every seventh cycle of 7 years. All debt, like finishing a game of Monopoly. Okay, it's all ended up in one place. That person, that's the winner. But then all the money goes back out and the game starts. What happens hypothetically if the debt is just written off? however unthinkable and unsayable that might be coming from somebody like me who doesn't know the first thing about economics?
Well, there's two schools of thought. So the system itself has a mantra that maybe many participants don't understand unwittingly. It's inflate or die. So the goal of the central planners right now is to inflate our way out of this debt. So you can inflate your nominal GDPs to bring down the ratios of debt to GDP. And that seems to be the current plan. A debt jubilee, I think, it depends on how it would be done. You can also have just natural defaults, and those left standing survive. I think the U.S. plan is to cause defaults in other countries over time. The dollar can be used as a weapon. So there's a lot of national security issues going on here. So three ways. They can keep inflating, but then the problem is you have revolutions. Once inflation rates get to a certain level, you topple governments. There's revolutions. That's been proven happening in the Arab Spring. Inflation rates were 50% of consumption levels for the very poor. That's when they riot. China knows this. Every government knows this. So they want to inflate, but they have to inflate at a rate at which the population won't revolt. So that seems to be the current plan. The debt jubilee is one way to do it, or just letting natural defaults happen, and then capital will be reallocated in proper ways. Right now, the system we have is making the rich richer. The private sector is starving for capital. So we kind of have this fake economy where the average person is struggling mightily, and it's distorting what the free market would do and allocate capital properly. We're allocating capital into companies that do surveillance and social media and things that really don't produce anything but control populations. If you look at all the startups, they're either AI or surveillance or cybersecurity. There's not a lot of things being done other than than to control people, in my humble opinion.
I when it comes to considering again what Trump may or may not do in that Schrodinger's presidency, that the box of which has not yet been opened, I'm mightily suspicious of how many billionaires have got a hand in it. When it's billionaires that are seeking who are telling us that they can come together to fix this, it absolutely makes me suspicious that it's so that when the music stops, which it surely must, they'll have somewhere to sit down in that game of musical chairs. I'm desperate for the sign of authenticity that I find credible, and I'm not sure I get it from people who have so benefited from the system as it has been for so long.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate right now. Look, Trump is doing the best he can, but there is going to be questions about very powerful, wealthy people being involved. And they say the right things, but we have to judge them by the fruits. And so I can't say definitively that Elon is a bad guy. Right now, he bought X. There's a lot of free speech going on there. So he did a net good thing. I'm sure part of the reason Trump was going to win anyways because of the U.S. economy, but Elon certainly helped with the free speech platform and what people are able to say on there. But, Elon is a human being. He has his own agendas and his own interests. We just have to be careful that we watch him and others and what they message and judge them by the fruits of their tree. So I'm optimistic, but I'm suspicious. We have to, just because we won and everything seems great, you got to watch for the head fake.
Do you think we'll ever see any consequences? I listen to you, as I have listened many times, to the scale of what has been done to people, physically, economically, spiritually, and all of the rest of it. And I'm amazed as well at how much we can now say compared to what was virtually unsayable even just months ago, never mind a couple of years ago. You couldn't say it for fear of being censored and cancelled or worse. And yet, although things are being said, I saw a report from somewhere the other day saying that people who've taken the COVID jabs were 112,000% more likely to be at risk from heart attack and blood clots and strokes than people who'd taken the flu shots, and indeed all other vaccinated products combined in the last 30, 40 years. And even when numbers like that come out, nothing actually happens to those who were active participants in the fraud.
I wholeheartedly agree. We need to see accountability. We need to see COVID investigations, hearings, and eventually justice done to those who did what they did to us. I'm watching the new administration and I'm giving them grace, and I believe they'll do the right thing. But for me, the warning sign will be if we don't see a recall of the mRNA vaccine in the first 6 months of the administration, I suspect what has happened is there's been a decision made that there's so much liability in the system that it could hurt the system, meaning Fortune 500 companies mandated these shots for all their employees. They're about 18 trillion of the GDP. That's 2/3 of our GDP. The medical system is 5 trillion of our GDP. There's so much money and so much liability and dollars that need to be paid out. I want to make sure we don't have this kind of memory holding of this, some ticky-tacky show trials. You have to recall the mRNA vaccine. What that'll do is alert the public that something happened. The average Joe, why did they recall it? And then they'll investigate. Then that will open the floodgates of liability. If that's not recalled, that will be a sign to me that we're going to memory hold this whole issue.
We here in the UK, I mean, it was the previous administration of a notionally conservative flavour that signed $1 billion deal with Moderna to develop the mRNA platform. So, I mean, if that's not indicative of the show must go on, I don't know what is. But when you look at, obviously, I spend a great deal of my time looking at, from this side of the Atlantic, at what's happening in the United States for all the obvious reasons. What's your take when you look at Britain? At the Labour government and the silencing and the censorship and the pursuit of net zero policies against what seems to be the incoming tide in the United States of America. How do you read the United Kingdom of Great Britain?
I've spent time in the UK. I worked at HSBC before BlackRock back in the day, so I'm familiar with your country and its people, and I'm very alarmed by what I'm seeing. I'm seeing people who make fake Facebook posts getting 20 months in jail, and I don't know what's going on in your country, but it seems to be that the Uni-Party system is more entrenched, and I don't know if the British people are more docile than the U.S., but there seems to be freedom fighters in your country and people speaking up. But it's alarming the amount of censorship, and the fact that they're censoring is all you need to know. They're trying to keep together their system of endless immigration. And I don't know what it is and why they're still, trying to, pump these vaccines and pretend nothing happened. I have suspicion, but there seems to be more unification in your system to keep this alarming, tyrannical censorship going. And maybe you could explain it to me, but some of us in the U.S., we jokingly say, but not jokingly say, the UK has fallen. It's fallen to the globalists.
That's what many of us feel here. Absolutely, that Britain has fallen. I genuinely, I share 100% the necessary optimism. I force myself to be optimistic.
Right.
I look at the United States of America, and I do think there is a latent renegade rebelliousness in the American psyche that is perhaps in the more distant past on my side of the Atlantic. But I think regardless of uniparties here or there, and regardless of all of that, I think there is There is something in America, and I think, perhaps more than anything else, the world, certainly the Western world, needs the American ideal, as yet unrealized. But we need the idea that is America. And I'm so, well, I'm less frustrated than I was, but it seems to me that there's such a wave of that renegade rebellious potential in America that stands ready to be ridden to to transformative victory by the right person. So I absolutely share your hope that what we seem to be seeing has within it kernels of authenticity, but a rational person would have to wait and see.
Yeah, wait and see. And there is a renegade aspect to America. Rugged individualism still exists. I'm someone that doesn't like to be told what to do. That's kind of been sometimes that's hurt me, sometimes that's benefited me, but I don't like being told what to do with fundamental things in my life and choices. And healthcare and being told you must get a jab, that was it for me. That was when I realized the system had manifested into pure evil. And my hope is that people in the UK can find that fighting spirit, and realize that those in authority don't always have your best interests at heart, and they have their own agendas. But I'm heartened by people like you and others in the UK who are fighting. Australia needs more people like you. In Australia, there's warriors in Australia, but I fear for Australia as well, and New Zealand unfortunately is gone.
Oh, it's there. It's here. It's here. The spirit is here. And the one thing I don't have is confidence in timescales. I don't know how long it will take to get to where we need to be. But that said, I do absolutely believe that my generation or my children's generation or whatever will arrive at that necessary destination. And I think the balance of probability is, and I don't know what you think, but I'd like to hear what you think, that we are looking at the death throes of a dying beast. And there's all this stuff about, how dangerous a mortally injured tiger is before it finally succumbs to wounds. But I think that system, that corrupted, bloated, debt-ridden system is mortally wounded. I think they saw it with what you described about the consequences of the last time they tried to fix a global financial crash. They tried to make a break for the finishing tape. They used the thing they called COVID as the starter pistol that enabled them to begin that sprint for the line. But I don't think they didn't make it to the line, and I don't think they're going to.
Well, I think what happened, and this is, I think, what they did with the COVID vaccines was a bridge too far. If their goal was to implement control and a new, surveillance security system, predicated upon the red herring of vaccine compliance and 6-month boosters. But they overreached with that. And what happened was this corrupt system of the last 50 years manifested into a jab that you were forced, the evil manifested into violence against all of us. And that was the overreach. And that's what you're seeing the reaction to. This is a lot of us freedom fighters, we're not freedom. I was in the system. I knew it was kind of a bullshit system. I knew it was corrupt. But I was like, oh, it's way above my pay grade. I can't fix this. But then when they said, you must take a jab to work and participate in society, I said, well, I got nothing left to lose. And they activated me and hundreds and millions of other people who said no more. And then we all found each other. I mean, I have a new set of new friends. We all started communicating. There was the team that I started reached out to me. I never would have met these, genius physicists. I've talked to these doctors. I've met these people. I've talked to senators just because I spoke up. And I spoke up because, I was just one voice, but there are many voices. And it was a bridge too far. And because of that, I think the opportunity to wake up everybody else through this issue alone, that your governments knowingly poisoned you for an agenda, will wake up the rest of the population, and maybe we can fix things. Because I think this is the issue that wakes everybody up.
It's almost like the thing they always say about psychopaths, that they want to get caught. that while they're perpetrating their dreadful crimes, some part of them wants to be caught. They want to be stopped because they can't stop themselves. It almost feels that with the thing they called COVID, it was that shouting out, "Here we are," and this is what we are doing. But you mentioned how dangerous, how toxic, how the lethality of the thing that was built on the mRNA platform. And I listened around about the same time probably that I started being aware of you. I was also aware of Mike Yeadon, the Pfizer former VP, who had no financial reason to put his head above the parapet, had all the gravitas and professional experience to be able to speak knowledgeably about how you go about building one of these things and the process, the safe process for so doing. And it became in the process of speaking up one of the most, if not the most censored people on the internet. And he has for long been howling into the wind about what you just said a few paragraphs ago. I mean, by all means, develop that thought.
Yeah, so I've spoken with him early days, and he's a very knowledgeable man. And when I came on the scene, I didn't pretend to be a doctor or a scientist. My whole thing was, I'm just counting ones and zeros, dead, not dead, disabled. So I was building a case that something changed in 21. He was early days saying, because of his knowledge, which I didn't have, it was purposely built to do this, and you wouldn't do this unless you had a plan. And so that's alarming. And his voice, which has been censored, and even some of us on our team would say, oh, he's crazy. Well, as time goes on, he's not crazy. He needs to be re-elevated back into the discussion because he called it out. But, early days, people didn't want to, he was way ahead of the Overton window. The Overton window has moved. We need to bring him back. That's my thought.
Absolutely. I mean, I was befriended by and in return befriended Mike. I listened to him. He's been here to my home. He's met my family. And if you've spent time with him, I mean, he's a lovely man. He's motivated by care, love, and when you listen to him, he had nothing to gain and everything to lose by speaking out the way that he did. And so, yes, I mean, of all the voices out there that have been silenced, his is the one that I would say most needs to be brought back into the public arena, because what he was saying is right.
Dead spot on. He was way out in front, and a lot of the people that are in our movement didn't want to go there. But now we're at the point where enough has been revealed. The Overton window has shifted. Mike needs to be brought back into the conversation. He's not crazy. Before
I let you go, Ed, it's been lovely talking to you, and I hope we'll talk again. But before I let you go at the end of this particular conversation, you mentioned right at the beginning that you dealt with and you cured yourself of depression by your physical exercise, being in the moment, and spirituality. Was that something that had been absent from your life, and that was reawakened or rediscovered, or was it discovered for the first time?
Well, so I got sober in 2005 and stopped drinking. Drinking was a big part of my life. And then my depression and anxiety came 5 years later. One of the things I wasn't doing in sobriety in the first 5 years was being of service. And so when I cured myself, part of this is changing diet, spirituality, and spirituality is being of service to others, and obviously having a higher power. I call my higher power God, Jesus Christ. But when you're depressed with anxiety and in your own head, it's literally impossible to have that thought when you're helping others. So you get out you want to get out of victimhood. Being of service just changes your attitude. And that's what I did. I started to be of service to others, stop focusing on my worries and try to help people with theirs. And that takes you out of your head and the constant imaginary fears and anxiety we all create. Anxiety and fear are imaginary. If you live in the present moment, right now I have a roof over my head, I have food in the fridge, so I could worry about things coming down the pike, but they haven't happened yet, and they may not happen. But the more you do that and ruminate, that causes anxiety, which leads to depression. Regulation of your thoughts is way better than taking an SSRI. It's way better to give over all your anxiety and worries to God. It's way better to eat healthy and exercise, because the mind and the body are so interlinked. And you take care of those three pillars, you won't be depressed. And if you're of service to others, you'll never be depressed.
There was a Scottish Enlightenment in the 18th century, and one of the figures was Francis Hutcheson, who at the time had the chair of moral philosophy at Glasgow University. And he, uniquely at the time, way ahead of his time, he lectured to his students that happiness was not random. It wasn't manna from heaven. It wasn't just settling on the lucky by chance. That on the contrary, it was the collateral benefit of giving every ounce of your effort to trying to make other people happy. And that if you did that, if you expended all of your sweat and tears trying to make other people happy, you would inadvertently make yourself happy in the process. And that idea was ultimately exported to the United States of America in the body of one of the first presidents of Princeton University, John Witherspoon, who was one of the contributors to and signatories of the Declaration of Independence. And there's reasons for thinking that the line about the pursuit of happiness came via Witherspoon from Hutcheson, that happiness is actively pursued. You don't wait for it to come. And I love the thought that there is that genuine, they talk about the special relationship between the United States of America and Britain, but I love the thought that something as profound and fundamental to American independent thinking is the right to pursue happiness, and that you're saying that you fixed yourself by being of service not to yourself but to others. That's the embodiment of that. No,
it's a wonderful sentiment, and it works. And I've met billionaires who are miserable because they're all in their head, never happy because the guy down the street has 2x the billions he has. It's insanity. I've met these people. They're never happy.
Ed Dowd, I've been in pursuit of you for a while now. I've wanted you to myself to talk to for an hour, and I've had that now, and I'll look forward to talking to you again. The conversation for me has been every bit as insightful and informative and inspiring as I hoped it would be. We'll speak again, I hope. Ed Dowd, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Neil, and of course we'll speak again. Thank you.